religious sect controls that country, the Alawites, or in Arabic, the Alawis. It's a branch of Shiite Islam, which explains why that regime there is so closely allied with Shiite Iran. They're mostly prevalent in the northwest mountains of Syria, the hills there. And they took over in the 60s through a socialist Ba'ath movement, but they were Alawites in the background. The Assad family prevailed and has ruled ever since. And they've ruled with cruelty and brutality. Very, very bad situation. But you know, the Sunni Muslims there, the majority, about 70%, they did try, some of you know this from the news, they did try to rise up once before and overthrow that regime. That was in 1982, and I was in South Lebanon working at the time, so I remember it very well. It was just happening 50 miles away in Damascus from where I was. They rose up in that country, and especially in the northern city of Hama, which is one of the centers of action today, right next to the city of Homs, where the main stuff is happening. They rose up en masse and demanded the regime go and that Sunni Muslims be allowed to rule themselves in that country. And what did the father of today's dictator, Bashar Assad, what did the father do? He ordered his Air Force in to bomb these demonstrators in place. Then he ordered his tanks to come in and shell them. Then, after 10 to 20,000 of his own people were killed, so in about 2 to 3 weeks, as many were killed as have been killed over the last year, so this was really brutal. Then he ordered steamrollers to come in and steamroll all the bodies of the dead Syrians under the rubble, and the city to be rebuilt over them. Well, if you didn't know about Muslim burial custom, you probably got some of it from the news about Osama bin Laden. You know, President Obama ordered a quick burial at sea for it because Muslims should have, according to their tradition, a very quick, dignified burial of some sort. And we saw with Gaddafi of Libya, another wonderful dictator. After he was brutally killed, he had brutally killed others, so I guess he reaped what he sowed, but they put his body, in a refrigerator for a number of days. It was humiliating to his family. He is supposed to have a quick burial. Well, here the dictator, Hafez al-Assad, just ordered his people buried in rubble and built right over them. Well, it had the effect of halting any revolt there for another 30 years. But this year it's happening, it's ongoing. There's supposed to be a ceasefire there now. It's surprisingly not holding. The shooting is still going on, it's all happening. And this is the one that I believe has the biggest prophetic implications. Now, I've been talking about a prophecy in Isaiah 17. Hanalei knows this. She's heard me speak this for 3 decades or something, since the early 80s. I was saying even then, don't look to the Soviet Union as the final thing. It's not going to be the United States against the Soviet Union. It's going to be Islamic fundamentalism rising up. And I was saying that because I had some smart people around me teaching me that, like Lance Levert and Derek Prince and some others in the land. And that's what's happened. But that prophecy tells us one day the city of Damascus will be entirely destroyed, entirely wiped out. It will no longer be there at all, and only flocks of animals will wander around in it afterwards. No humans, it says, will be there at all to even disturb these animals. And many of us believe that's probably describing a nuclear strike that would leave radiation, deadly radiation, behind for some time. Humans couldn't go back in there without risking their lives, but animals wouldn't know about this invisible, deadly radiation that's there. Well, that prophecy's never been fulfilled in all these years. Damascus is still there, several million residents today. It's been conquered a bunch of times, but never destroyed. But one day the prophet said it's going to happen. And Jeremiah 49 echoes this. It says, one day the soldiers of Syria will fall dead in the streets of Damascus in place, and the walls of the city will be set on fire. Again, seemingly a description of a nuclear strike. Well, it doesn't say Israel will do this, but what it does say is that Israel's fatness will become lean. So Israel will suffer at the same time as Damascus is destroyed, implying there's a war between them. One in which Israel isn't destroyed, but that she suffers as a result. And in my first novel, The End of Days, some of you've read, it begins with this very scenario. Hezbollah attacks northern Israel. Israel responds. It escalates. Syria gets involved. They use chemical weapons. And Syria's a country of 20 million people. That little country has the world's largest arsenal of chemical and biological weapons of any one country on earth. More than Russia, more than China, more than the US, Germany, Japan, anybody else. They've got a huge arsenal, and that's not, like with Saddam, that's not a do they or don't they. They've taken reporters in there. We know where it's produced. We know how it's produced. That's a definite fact. And my novel begins with that, and they use them. Israel warns that if these are used, they'll respond in a stronger way, and they do say this all the time. By the way, the Israeli leaders are always saying this. We will not be the first to introduce weapons of mass destruction into the Middle East. We will not be the first. But if they're used against us and we have severe casualties, we will be the second. I.e., we have them. We're just not going to be the first to ever use them. But if they're used against us and we suffer great casualties, we will respond in a stronger way, i.e. we have nuclear weapons. And we'll use them if we have to. Israel's not threatening to do that. They're trying to deter a non-conventional attack against them. Israel's a country of 7 million people. It's a tiny little land. Most of you have been over there. You've seen it. The size of New Jersey. They cannot absorb a first strike of weapons of mass destruction, so they're trying to deter it. But if it doesn't work, and they have no other choice, they will use it. Jeremiah 49 is an interesting phrase attributed to God. He says, "How the city of my joy, Damascus, has not been abandoned." It's a very strange phrase in the Hebrew. It's a double negative. How the city of my joy has not been abandoned. In other words, it sounds like God was hoping they would flee the city. And I believe the Israelis, and it's in my novel, first novel, they would warn, even though that gives away the, some of the edge, they would warn that these sorts of weapons can be used. Get out of there if you can. And it almost sounds like the regime is preventing its own people from fleeing. Well, this regime that's there right now is just capable of that sort of cruelty. They are so evil as we see this now. Now the UN said 2 days ago 9,000 have been killed in this growing revolt there. Now, whether this is going to happen now or not, of course, only God knows. But certainly the ground is there right now with everything happening for this to take place. It could be that the rebels win, and these are mostly Muslim fundamentalists. Al-Qaeda is supporting them, but so are the Saudis and others. They're not going to be Israel's friends if they take over any more than Assad is today. But I think it could happen before that, because the experts are all saying the current Syrian regime will not go down without taking everyone else with it. They are that evil. They are that from the pit of hell. And Assad has said, we'll hit Israel. If anybody, even another Arab country, intervenes against us, we'll hit it. Israel as an ally of the West and as an enemy of Syria, we'll hit it. And of course, Iran is supporting them heavily. We just, interestingly enough, yesterday, a couple days ago, had the election in Israel of a new opposition leader in the Knesset, Shalom Mofaz, a former chief of staff, and he was born in Iran. He speaks fluent Farsi, the Iranian language, and I think that may be the Lord, because if Israel goes against Iran's nuclear program, as seems very likely, probably Bibi Netanyahu will form a coalition government as broad as possible for such a thing. And here is a man that knows Iran like the back of his hand. Isn't that interesting? He's the opposition leader, but he's a former military leader. But here we have Iran's leaders, as I've been pointing out for some years now, they're not threatening Israel. They're not threatening Israel. That's just not accurate. They're not threatening to destroy Israel. They're simply not. They're vowing to destroy Israel. They are vowing. They're saying